And there are, of course, a lot of questions like, do we learn in school about the Indians? Do we learn about the colonization of North America? Do we learn about the US's expansion to the West? Do we learn about the US-Mexico War? Do we learn about Vietnam? Do we learn about Nixon or some aspects of American culture and technological achievements? If you want to find out, just stay tuned and watch the rest of the video. Hi and welcome back, everybody. I always find it kind of interesting what people learn in their schools in some countries about the history of other countries. So I decided to show you what we learn in our schools about US history in Croatia, in Europe. So I'm going to show you the original textbooks from the first until the fourth grade of gymnasium, which is kind of like, I would guess, high school in the US. So just a few quick notes about Croatia. Croatia is a country inside of Europe. It's also a member of the European Union. It has a population of around 4 million people. It's a NATO state, and some say that Croatia is in Central Europe, some say it's in Southeastern Europe, but that's kind of a political thing. I don't want to go into that. And Croatians also speak a Slavic-based language, and it's, when you branch out the tree, it's a South Slavic language. And just a few quick notes about the school system. So you have pre-K kindergarten, of course, and after that you have primary school, which is 8 years, and then when you're approximately 15 years old, then you go into high school, which is 4 years or 3 years. It depends which high school you want to inscribe into. So you have like technical schools, gymnasiums, medical schools, economic schools. If you want to go to a higher education after you finish your high school education, most of the people inscribe into a gymnasium. So a gymnasium has 4 years, and I'm actually going to go through the textbooks of the gymnasium for the history classes that they use. So yeah, let's just jump in. And yeah, those are not the textbooks. Those are just some of my history books that I have. So don't be worried. It's not like that much. And yeah, before we jump into the textbook and the different topics that we learn about US history in our high schools, I just want to point out that Croatia was throughout history a small nation in landmass and also in population. And it was actually for a long period of time, throughout its history, a member state, or was a part of the Habsburg monarchy and then Austria-Hungary later on. And it was also a part of Yugoslavia after in the 20th century. So the history of Croatia that is taught in high schools or schools in general is very Eurocentric, meaning it's more focused on European history than, I don't know, some Asian history or African history or South American or North American history. And because of that, most of the topics in the textbooks are either about national history, so Croatian history, or European history. But okay, let's jump into the history textbooks for the first class of gymnasium. And most of the pupils that go into that class are approximately 15 years old. So I have it in digital form, so I'm just gonna put it directly on screen, the original text, so you can see how it looks like and also how the topics are written and what's pointed out and so on. So let's just jump in. Okay, so we start with the first textbook for the first year of gymnasium. Fun fact for all the Americans who don't know, if somebody has his last name with the ending ich or EC or ECH, he probably had some ancestors either from Croatia or Serbia or Bosnia. So that's the summary, a translator, but I'm going to roughly translate it. In the first part, like the pupils learn like what is history, why do we learn history, prehistory, civilizations like Egypt or India or China, and then they jump, of course, to Greece, like Alexander the Great, so Macedonians and Greeks, and of course Rome throughout the history. But yeah, as you expected, like in the first grade, we don't talk about America or the US because the US wasn't founded back then. And this is the second textbook for the second year. And there are some topics, you can say US related, but more like America related. Here, topic number 31, discovery and the conquest of the new worlds. And we're going to jump to the page so you can see how it's designed, and I'm going to roughly translate you everything that you see. So first, of course, why the discoveries happened. Portugal and the different European states wanted to try to find new routes. And of course, here is Mr. Columbus. I know that they're like conflicting like ideas or whatever. Was he bad? Was he good? Or whatever. But here in the textbooks, it's just like a neutral thing, like, hey, he discovered America. At the end, of course, the big one, the unknown one, Amerigo Vespucci, the guy who had the idea, like, this doesn't look like India to me. Maybe this is new land. And puff, people actually realize that it's a completely new world. And then there's a brief explanation, the good and the bad things that followed the discovery of America. And there's, of course, the slave trade, gold with silver, and all the different things like agricultural things that went back and forth between Europe and America. So okay, that was the second class. This is how it looks like from the inside. So visually, I would say really appealing because you have all the pictures and also maps, everything that's important. It's bold, so it's kind of easy to read through it. We're just gonna jump into the third grade and see what they are up to. Okay, so we're now in the third grade. Of course, the same design because it's the same editor. The topics are listed here again, and it begins with the Industrial Revolution, 18th century, absolutistic monarchies in Europe, and the Enlightenment age. And the third grade ends with uh, the political movements and the different parties inside of Croatia before the First World War. Topic number 4, the genesis of the United States of America, the birth of a nation. Topic number 4 here, page 166, Western Europe, Great Britain and France, and the resistance of the colonies. And then here, United States of America in the second half of the 19th century. Okay, so we're now on page 24, the genesis of the United States. Everything like the French and the English were the main ones that colonized North America. Mayflower is mentioned. The Puritans are mentioned, and also, of course, the religious persecutions that were in Europe. Louisiana is, of course, mentioned. Big conflict that the French had with the Indians, 13 British colonies. Some people were like, how did you know the East Coast, those small states? Now I'm going to show you why. Oh, and here's a picture of uh, Thanksgiving. But when we jump to the second page, as I told you in our textbooks, in our history textbooks, we use a lot of maps. Here is also the mention of Cambridge and Harvard, and of course the War of Independence. It mentions that the Brits imposed, like taxes, and of course the Boston Tea Party, and here you go, your big General George Washington in this picture. And then, of course, the First Continental Congress is mentioned, the Continental Army, and of course the Loyalists, the Declaration of Independence, and then of course that you Americans won the war, and the treaty in Paris, Thomas Jefferson. And then there's a separate part only for the Constitution of the United States. It's mentioned that you got your Senate, Congress, that the US became a federation and not a confederation, the three branches of government, like the Congress, the President, and the Supreme Court. And here is the conquest of the Wild West. All the illnesses that the Europeans brought to America are mentioned. The Cherokees are also mentioned here. And I think it's in English, it's the Valley of the Tears. Of course, slavery is mentioned, like one of the big parts of the US economy. Benjamin Franklin, one of the founding fathers. Okay, I just want to mention this briefly. So all the different inventions, it's not only US related, but for the whole world. So I'm not just going to go through this because it's too much. Fun fact, Nikola Tesla, he came from Croatia to America, although he was ethnically Serbian, but he was born and raised inside of the territory of today's Croatia. Okay, we are now at the page 173. So the United States in the second half of the 19th century, the Monroe Doctrine, so America to Americans, influx of Europeans, gold rush, you bought Louisiana from the French, Florida from the Spanish, the American Civil War. It is mentioned that slavery was one of the major causes for the war, but it's just like mentioned, like it's a war between uh, the North and the South states, and that Abraham Lincoln was for abolishing slavery. Abolitionism is mentioned like a term, and then you have the Confederation. Robert E. Lee is also mentioned. Graham, Sherman. The war ended in 1865 and the slavery was abolished in the US. What happened after the Civil War? The US went to be one of the major superpowers in the world. William Booth, who killed Lincoln, like picture how the US expanded. Votanka I Votanka. The is he called the bull? The bull who sits. I think it's the bull who sits in English. I'm not sure. That was it for the third class, and now we're going to jump to the textbook for the fourth class. Okay, and now we're in the fourth grade, so again, the same design. And the thing with the fourth class, the topics are a little bit odd divided, so I will need more jump cuts. Okay, so the first mention of the US is on page 12. US getting stronger in the world, the revolution of steel and electricity, the Panama Canal. So we're now on page 37. The US entered the First World War. Woodrow Wilson was the president. Woodrow Wilson and his 14 points are also mentioned because they're really important for the history of Europe, because that gave a lot of nation states the rights to secede. And a lot of nation states that seceded, let's say, from the Habsburg monarchy, made it because of the 14 points that Woodrow Wilson made. And now we jump to the next topic, which is the big global crisis. It happened in the US and then spread all around the world. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who introduced the New Deal, and the New Deal is then explained. It says that it helped the US to go out of the recession. Now, here is an interesting topic: culture, sport, and things like that. Hitchcock and Walt Disney, and of course Mickey Mouse. Charlie Chaplin, Louis Armstrong, jazz is also a big thing that also jumped to Europe. And now we jump to the Second World War, the Atlantic Treaty, or I don't know how it's called in English, the attack on Pearl Harbor. The US declared war on Japan. We are more focused about the development of the Second World War inside of Europe than in the Pacific, because it's, closer. But Midway is mentioned, the Guadalcanal. Is there a mention of Iwo Jima? Here is a map. Eisenhower, so the Battle of El Alamein, the invasion of Sicily, the Tehran Conference, the opening up of the Western Front, the Japanese kamikaze, of course Yalta, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the United Nations, and also like the division of Europe between East and West, and of course the division of Germany and the Berlin Wall, the Truman Doctrine, Marshall's Plan, NATO, Communist Capitalist War in Korea, Vietnam War, Cuban Crisis, Fidel Castro, Kennedy, Nixon, Ronald Reagan, Star Wars Adventures against the USSR, woo, hello, 9/11, and Al-Qaeda, Martin Luther King, the civil rights movement, actually directly connected, as you can see on the next page, with the fact that, like a few years before that, black Americans couldn't even vote, and then a black American won the election. So Barack Obama is mentioned in that context. Neil Armstrong, which is a hoax. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, we're actually done here. That was the last lesson that had something to do with the United States. I hope you enjoyed it and that you maybe saw another perspective on what some random European country cares about in US history and about what not. So yeah, I really hope you enjoyed it, and yeah, see ya.